The tale of Gallowmere begins long before the kingdom's cobblestones knew peace. Back in the year 1286, when shadows moved like living things and whispered the name of a single man, Zarok. The sorcerer's ambition was a plague upon the land. With foul magic, he summoned an army of demons and undead, their bodies stitched together by darkness itself, and he marched them towards the heart of the kingdom. Bards will one day sing of a shining knight who rose to meet that evil. A paragon of courage named Sir Daniel Fortesque, captain of the king's army. They will tell breathless crowds how Sir Dan led the charge across the blood-soaked fields, how he struck Zarok down with the final, dying blow, and how his sacrifice saved Gallowmere. Children grew up believing the tale, statues were carved, songs were written, a hero was born. But legends, like old tapestries, rarely showed their frayed edges. In truth, the Battle of Gallowmere began and ended for Sir Daniel in a single humiliating instant. As he spurred his men forward, an enemy arrow found the weak point in his helm and buried itself deep in his eye. The great hero of Gallowmere fell before he ever reached the front line. The first casualty of a war he had been meant to lead. The soldiers, confused but still burning with fury, pressed on without him. By grit and sheer numbers, they shattered Zarok's army and sent the sorcerer fleeing into the wilds. He disappeared into legend, presumed dead, and in the muddled retellings that followed, helped along by the fog of war and the soft forgetting of time, Sir Daniel rose from the ashes of embarrassment into glory. The truth of his cowardice and misfortune was buried, replaced by a shining myth of heroism. Thus Gallowmere gained a champion who never earned his title, and a lie that would echo through the centuries. 100 years slipped quietly through Gallowmere's fields and forests. The legend of Sir Daniel Fortesque only grew grander with every retelling. His stone likeness stood proudly in town squares, his name etched into the kingdom's memory as its greatest champion. Few alive remembered the truth, fewer still cared. In the year 1386, beneath a moon smothered by storm clouds, Zarok returned. The sorcerer stepped out from centuries of hiding with a heart full of bitterness and a mind sharpened by vengeance. With a single incantation, he drowned Gallowmere in eternal night, choking the land with the darkness that seemed to breed. Then, with a twisted grin, he siphoned the souls from a nearby village, leaving his people hollow, shambling puppets bound to his will. Unsatisfied, Zarok marched to the graveyard. His necromantic power rolled across the tombstones like a black tide, shaking loose the dead from their slumber. And from one ancient crypt, forgotten by time, a very unusual soldier stirred. Sir Daniel Fortesque's skeleton jolted upright as a wave of dark magic coursed through him. His eye socket, still gaping from the arrow that felled him a century before, filled with a single, dangling cobweb. He plucked it out with mild irritation. His jawbone, missing entirely, left his attempts at speech little more than muffled clacks. But when he glanced around the crypt and realized he still existed, still had a chance, something sparkled in his lone, remaining eye. He grinned. Shame weighed heavy on his resurrected bones. His entire legacy had been built on falsehood, a heroic story he had never earned in life. But now, fate, or perhaps cruel irony, had given him a second chance. For the first time, Sir Dan stepped out of his coffin, not as an accident of history, but as a warrior with purpose. Armed with rusty armor and unwavering determination, he set out into the haunted night to stop Zarok's reign of terror, and finally become the hero Gallowmere believed him to be. But the path to redemption was not so simple. His Scattered across the kingdom were ancient chalices of the departed, magical vessels that filled with the souls of vanquished foes. Only true heroes could claim them. Each chalice granted entry to the Hall of Heroes, a celestial sanctuary where the spirits of legendary warriors judged Fortesque's worth. If he deemed him deserving, they would lend him their enchanted weapons, or artifacts forged from myth, to aid him in the coming battles. Thus began Sir Dan's march through the darkness, a skeletal knight with one good eye, no jaw, and a heart full of stubborn hope, determined at last to earn the title that history had mistakenly handed him. Sir Dan's journey across Gallowmere was anything but quiet. No sooner had he stumbled out of his crypt than the land itself rose against him. Zombies clawed up through the earth, their jaws snapping hungrily. Imps skittered across the rooftops like wicked children. And in the farmlands, scarecrows tore themselves free from their stakes. Gardens bulged with mutant pumpkins, swollen by dark magic. While whole villages, stripped of their souls, wandered in violent, mournful confusion. Gallowmere had always been strange, but Zarok's return twisted it into a nightmare. And then, one misstep made it worse. Deep within the enchanted forest, Sir Dan solved an ancient puzzle meant to test the wisdom of true heroes. Instead, with a single misplaced action, he accidentally shattered the seal, imprisoning the shadow demons, nightborn horrors older than the kingdom itself. Freed from their timeless confinement, they stretched their skeletal wings, hissed their thanks to no one, and immediately joined Zarok's swelling forces. Darkness thickened over Gallowmere like spilled ink. Burdened by guilt, yet unable to turn back, Sir Dan pressed on. His path carried him across a rotting battlefield, where undead knights clashed endlessly in echoes of forgotten wars. He trudged through a sunken town, its houses crooked beneath the waterline, and its streets haunted by grotesque, faint creatures that once had been people. In the mountains, he braved caverns patrolled by rhinotaurs, massive horned brutes whose roars shook stone loose. And in Gallowmere's necropolis, he confronted the restless dead, condemned criminals, still furious centuries after their execution, clawing at anyone who dared disturb their torment. At last, battered, but not broken, Sir Daniel reached the ruined castle of King Peregrin, now smothered in shadow demon corruption. The air shimmered with their sinister presence, their forms clinging to the walls like living shadows. But within the castle's heart, Dan found an unexpected ally, the ghost of the king himself. With the king's spectral guidance, Sir Dan enacted a desperate, final gamble: destroy the corrupted castle entirely. As the stones cracked, the ground groaned beneath centuries of weight. As the fortress collapsed in itself, the shadow demons were dragged screaming back into oblivion, this time forever. Dan, however, barely escaped the destruction. He sprinted across the falling beams and crumbling floors, leaping free just as the structure gave its final shudder and sank into ruin. He had no time to celebrate. From the smoke rose the Jabberwocky, a monstrous abomination of wings, claws, and rage. It thundered after him, shaking the earth with each step. Dan ran, stumbling, scrambling for dear life. Only the sudden swoop of a massive vulture saved him, snatching him up in his talons and whisking him off just as the creature's jaw snapped shut below. The relief lasted only moments before Dan found himself dropped onto the deck of a flying pirate ship, drifting through the cursed skies. Its crew, nothing but bones wrapped in ragged coats, turned their empty sockets toward him. Their captain, a grinning skeleton with a cutlass of crackling magic, challenged him with a roar that rattled the mast. Dan had no choice but to fight. After a fierce battle across the swaying planks and shrieking sails, Sir Daniel defeated the skeletal captain and claimed command of the airborne vessel. With the wind at his back and the cursed ship beneath his feet, he steered toward the looming silhouette, Zarok's castle, the final battleground where his destiny awaited. Zaroks Lair felt less like a fortress and more like a living wound carved into the world. As Sir Daniel pushed deeper through his twisted corridors, the air grew thick with smoke and sorcery. Walls pulsed with sticky light, Shadows curled around him like claws. Each step echoed with the memories of the century-old war, the one where Dan had failed to finish in life, but was determined to end in death. At last he entered the sorcerer's arena, ringed with towering obsidian pillars and lit by an eerie green glow. And there, at the far end of the arena, stood Zarok, hooded and smirking, his eyes burning with ancient spite. So, the hero of Gallowmere returns. With the snap of his fingers, the floor trembled. Skeletal warriors, Zarok's elite guard, crawled from beneath the stone. Their armor still bore the marks of battles lost a century ago. Their swords raised, ready for battle. Dan reached instinctively for one of the chalices he had earned through his trials. Its surface shimmered in his hand, heavy with the souls of Gallomere's fallen soldiers. He lifted it high. The chalice burst into radiant light. Suddenly, ghostly warriors, the very soldiers who had fought and died in the original war, materialized beside him. Though spectral, their weapons could strike Zarok's undead army. With a roar of vengeance that echoed beyond the physical, they charged forward, clashing with the skeletal legion in a storm of shimmering steel. But the battle alone was not enough. Dan had to keep them standing. He channeled the chalice's magic again, sending arcs of healing lightning into his spectral allies as they faltered. Each bolt rekindled their fading forms, keeping the ancient soldiers anchored to the world, long enough to push through the tide of Zarok's undead. Should Dan falter, even for a moment, the necromancer's forces would overwhelm him, ending his journey completely. As the final skeleton collapsed, its brittle bones skittering across the arena floor, Zarok's triumphant smirk twitched. He was losing. Zarok thrust his staff into the ground. The floor cracked. A massive armored knight, Lord Kardok, champion of Zarok's Dark Order, rose from the depths with a bellow that rattled Dan's bones. The giant warrior charged, sword blazing with necrotic fire. This time, Dan fought alone. Steel rang against steel as Dan dodged Kardok's titanic strikes, countering with all the strength and skill he gathered on his long journey. It was a brutal duel, one between a fallen knight seeking redemption and a monster made to crush hope. At last, Dan's blade found its mark. Kardok staggered, roared, and then collapsed into dust. Zarok's composure shattered. Dark magic ripped through him, twisting his body into a towering, monstrous form. Horned, hulking, and burning with pure hatred, he roared, shaking the entire arena, and charged with the intent to destroy Dan utterly. But Sir Daniel stood his ground. The battle was fierce, the sorcerer's monstrous limbs tearing through stone and flame alike. Yet Dan pushed forward, striking blow after blow, driven not by the legend, but by the newfound truth. This fight was his alone. With a final, devastating strike, Zarok's beastly form reeled backward, collapsing under its own corrupted weight. As it fell, the magic unraveled. The creature shrank, and finally reverted to Zarok's frail, human form. For the first time in a century, silence filled the lair, and Sir Daniel, no longer a false hero, but a true one, stood victorious. Zarok staggered backward, clutching his staff as if it were the only thing anchoring him to the world. For a moment, Dan thought the sorcerer might beg, might plead for mercy, the way so many of his victims once had. Instead, Zarok smiled. "You may have beaten me, Four Squad, but I will not fall alone." With a final surge of spiteful magic, the sorcerer slammed his staff into the ground. The arena trembled, crafts spiderwebbed across the floor. The entire lair began to shake as the spell tore through its foundations. Then, with a thunderous crash, a massive slab of stone broke free and came down directly upon Zarok, silencing him forever, crushed in the very tomb he had created for them both. Dan's eye widened. The lair was coming apart. Debris thundered all around him, the shadows flickering with collapsing magic. He darted through the falling arches and shattered hallways, bones rattling violently with each tremor. Just when escape seemed impossible, a familiar screech echoed through the dust. The vulture. Swooping down from the crumbling rafters, it grasped Dan by the shoulders, somehow knowing exactly what to do. It lifted him just as the ground gave way beneath his feet. Together they burst out through a collapsing archway, fleeing into the open night as Zaroks Lair crumbled into ruin behind them. The explosion of dark magic that followed rippled across Gallowmere like a cleansing wind. The stolen souls, those taken from frightened villagers, corrupted warriors, and lost innocents, spiraled upward in shimmering currents of light, then drifted home like fireflies. One by one, the citizens awoke from their soulless trance, their eyes bright once more. Peace had finally returned to the kingdom. High above the countryside they had saved, Dan tapped gently in the vulture's claws and pointed back toward the graveyard. The bird seemed to understand it. It carried him across the starlight sky, down to the quiet slope where his old crypt waited. Dan landed softly, turning to face the world he had finally lived up to. For the first time, the legend of Sir Daniel Fortesque was true. Not a tale patched together by history's forgetfulness, but a hard-won truth, forged through courage and perseverance. With a satisfying nod, Daniel pushed open the stone door and stepped inside. He lay down in the place where he had once been forgotten, but now as a hero. The crypt sealed behind him, settling into peaceful silence. And Sir Daniel Fortesque, at last redeemed, returned to his eternal rest. Death this time did not come with darkness. Instead, Sir Daniel found himself drifting upward through warm golden light. Weightless, unburdened, carried as though on a gentle tide. When the radiance faded, he stood once more before the towering gates of the Hall of Heroes, the eternal sanctuary where legends rested. Only now the hall was not silent. Music, real music, echoed through the marble corridors. As Dan stepped inside, he saw the impossible. The heroes of old, no longer frozen in stone, but alive. Their armor gleamed as they feasted, drank, and reveled around the long central table. They had all awakened for one reason. When Sir Daniel entered, the noise faltered. Conversation dropped to hushed whispers. One by one, the heroes turned toward him. Warriors whose deeds had shaped kingdoms, whose names had long been sung for centuries. Now they murmured in awe. He did it. He earned his place. Dan scratched the back of his skull, and then with a sudden burst of playful bravado, he sprang onto the table. Plates rattled, goblets toppled, as the skeletal knight performed a series of surprisingly graceful acrobatics. Dan leaped and landed squarely in the central chair, the throne reserved for Gallomere's greatest champion. A cup arced downward, and with a swift kick, Dan sent it spinning once more, catching it neatly in his bony hand. A roar of laughter and applause filled the hall. One of the heroes stepped forward and filled Dan's cup with wine. Dan raised it proudly and attempted to drink, only for the liquid to pour straight through his empty jaw and splash across the floor. The heroes cheered louder. They gathered around him, clapping him on the shoulders, praising his courage, his perseverance. No longer the butt of a legend, no longer the stain on Gallomere's history. Sir Daniel had become the hero he had always meant to be. High above the hall, etched across the sky, a constellation formed, the unmistakable shape of Sir Daniel, standing tall with the sword raised, forever immortalized as a true hero of Gallowmere. So his legend finally shone, not from lies, but from the light he earned. 500 years passed in silence after that. The legend of Sir Daniel Fortesque, once written across the night sky in shimmering light, slowly drifted into folklore, then into the dusty museum place cards and school children's ghost stories. His bones lay peacefully on display in the Victoria and Albert Museum. An oddity, nothing more. But deep beneath the city, a man cloaked in obsession unearthed the tattered remnants of Zarok's ancient spellbook. Within the crumbling pages, he found exactly what he craved. Forbidden magic capable of twisting the modern world into a nightmare. Only a few pages were missing, but what he possessed was enough. This man's name was Lord Palethorn, and this man instantly raised his hands and uttered words that had not been spoken in half a millennium. A spell of internal darkness rolled over London like a thunderhead. Gas lamps flickered out, shadows ripped with unnatural life. Monsters, beasts that did not belong in any age, clawed their way into the waking world. But without the missing pages, Palethorn could not fully command his creations. They were wild, unruly, driven by chaos instead of obedience. And the spell had another consequence he did not foresee. In a quiet museum, beneath a velvet rope and a faded plaque praising his legendary heroism, Sir Daniel's skeleton shuddered. A spark of magic threaded itself through his bones, and then with the creak of the old joints and the clatter of ribs, Sir Dan awoke once more, confused and very much alive, or as alive as a skeleton could be. He had barely stood upright when help arrived. Professor Hamlet Kiff, a brilliant but eccentric scholar of the occult, had been expecting something like this. Accompanied by Winston, his ghostly butler, Kiff convinced Dan that he, and he alone, had a chance of stopping Palethorn's darkness from swallowing London whole. The missing pages of Zarok's spellbook were scattered across the city, and only a warrior with one foot in the world of the living and the other in the world of the dead could hope to retrieve them. Dan, ever reluctant, yet bound by destiny, agreed. Their journey dragged them through Victorian London's shadowed underbelly, fog-drenched streets stalked by werewolves, crypts haunted by vengeful spirits, fairgrounds overrun by twisted automatons, and hidden catacombs crawling with creatures born of Palethorn's reckless ambition. Dan fought tirelessly, clattering down alleyways, sword drawn, determined to protect this strange new era he barely understood. He was in the depths of the ancient Egyptian exhibit, one of Palethorn's corrupted hubs of magic, that Dan encountered Kiya, an awakened mummy princess whose spirit burned far brighter than her wrapping suggested. Regal, fierce, and astonishingly alive despite her undead state, Kiya joined Dan's quest with a warrior's resolve. And in the quiet moments between battles, amidst the chaos of undead London, Sir Dan found something he had never expected. Love. Even in his skeletal form, something about him drew Kiya closer. A shared strangeness, a shared courage, and a shared fate. With Kip's guidance, Winston's loyal support, and Kiya at his side, Sir Dan stepped once more into legend. The darkness over London deepened, the monsters multiplied, and Palethorn's power grew stronger by the night. But so did Sir Dan, for the hero of Gallowmere had risen again, and this time, he had more than destiny to fight for. He had a future. Kiya's footsteps vanished into the fog of Whitechapel, that cursed maze of gas lamps and narrow alleys where London's nightmares seemed to breed. She had gone alone, determined to investigate the psychic tremors radiating from the district. Dan wanted to follow, but she insisted she would return quickly. She did not. Hours later, Kit and Winston delivered the news with trembling voices. The monster plaguing Whitechapel was no beast conjured from a spellbook, no demon from forgotten pages. It was a man, Jack the Ripper. Kiya had been murdered. The world fell silent for Sir Dan. His bones fell heavier, as though grief itself had settled into them. For the first time since his resurrection, he laid down his sword. He turned away from the quest, from the fight. What was the point? The woman he loved, his bright spark in his unfamiliar era, was gone. Dan wandered to London's reeking sewers, a labyrinth of tunnels lit only by the faint glow of his own eye. He no longer cared where he went. He simply walked. Empty and hollow as the bones he wore, but fate was not finished with him. In the deep chambers beneath the city, strange amphibious creatures, the Molochs, rose from the fetid waters and gathered around him. To them, Dan was not a failure. He was a god. They worshipped his skeletal form, bowing to him, touching his armor with awe. In their underground kingdom, Dan found something startling. A massive, dust-covered machine. Its brass gears and glass tubes jutting out like the ribs of a mechanical beast. It was Kif's time machine. A failed experiment abandoned years ago. Hope ignited in Dan's hollow chest. If the machine could be rebuilt, he could return to the moment of Kiya's death. He could save her. With renewed purpose, Dan scoured London. Streets, rooftops, tunnels, secret laboratories, collecting the scattered components required to assemble the device. At last, the machine roared to life. Light poured from its core. Dan stepped inside. Time folded. He emerged in Whitechapel again, moments before Kiya's murder. The alley was dark. The fog thick. Jack the Ripper advanced on her, knife glinting like silver of the moon. Dan arrived in a flash of swirling blue light and confronted the killer. Jack dropped his blade, begging, insisting he was only a man. But Sir Daniel was no longer in the mood for mercy. With cold, unshakable resolve, Dan raised his pistol and shot Jack, ending the monster London would never forget. The paradox he had created rippled through time like a storm. His past self wavered, flickered, and then Dan stepped forward, merging with that earlier version of himself. Power surged through his bones. Light enveloped him. When the flash cleared, he stood clad in brilliant super armor, glowing with temporal energy. He had changed time, and now he could change the future. With Kiya alive and the timeline restored, Dan rejoined the quest and claimed the final missing page of Zarok's spellbook. But before he could deliver it, Palethorn appeared, snatching it from his hands, and offered Dan the one thing he thought he wanted most. Join me. Rule beside me in a world reborn from darkness. Dan's answer was immediate. No. Enraged, Palethorn sent his twisted assistants, Mander and Dogman, to kill him. Dan cut them down without hesitation. Then he pursued Palethorn into the heart of his lair. A spiraling chamber, thick with magic. Palethorn opened the spellbook and summoned a hulking blue demon, its form crackling with energy. The creature thundered forward, ready to tear Dan apart. But through cunning and bravery, Dan turned the demon against his master. Both sorcerer and summoned beast fell, consumed by the collapsing spell. With his dying breath, Palethorn hurled one last act of spite into the world. A time bomb, glowing and unstable, casting brutal light across the chamber. Dan fled as the lair erupted in a maelstrom of fire, stone, and temporal chaos. Everything Palethorn had built, tearing itself apart in a single, furious instant. The darkness over London began to lift. And though the battle was not fully over, Sir Daniel had once again shaped the fate of an entire era, the unbreakable will of a true hero. After the explosion consumed Palethorn's lair, sounds fell over London like a gentle snowfall. The sorcerer was gone. His demons had scattered. The last threads of the spell of eternal darkness unraveled into nothing. And for the first time since his resurrection, Sir Daniel Fortesque felt peace. True, quiet peace. Kiya stood beside him in the clearing smoke, her ancient wrappings fluttering softly in the night wind. She reached for his hand, and though he had no flesh to feel her touch, he felt it just the same. "Where to now, my brave knight?" she asked. Dan glanced towards the towering machine humming behind them. The time machine that had rewritten history itself. Its brass gears glowed with residual energy. The door swung open with a hiss of steam, revealing an interior of swirling blue light. Kiya smiled, and Dan returned it with that crooked, skeletal grin. she had grown to adore. Hand in hand, they stepped inside, going towards the future together.